Thank you for joining us today, both in person and on the phone lines. Today I am joined by Superintendent Andrew Matthews, who led the deployment for yesterday's operation. He will join me in answering questions after my opening statement. Our Public Information Officer, Constable John McLeod, is assisting those who were able to join in person, and Constable Alicia Joseph will be moderating the conference call component of the availability. We appreciate you working with us as we deal with limitations of the pandemic. Today, I want to provide some background on yesterday's enforcement actions related to several illegal homeless encampments. I will also answer several questions that have been raised and provide the surrounding context. Over the last several months, there has been an ongoing increase in complaints and calls for police service in the areas of and surrounding a number of illegal encampments across HRM. These complaints relate to assaults, domestic disputes, thefts, indecent acts, liquor offenses, break-and-enters, and allegations of threatening behavior. Following months of unsuccessful attempts at direct engagement, awareness and education efforts with the occupants, yesterday, we used our enforcement options to respond to the ongoing situation. As well, all occupants were provided with an additional opportunity to access housing opportunities. It came on the heels of verbal warnings to occupants, as well as formal written notices earlier in the week to vacate the dwellings. Yesterday, along with compliance officers and Parks and Recreation members, HRP officers were peacefully able to vacate 3 of the highest risk encampments in Halifax. While attending the Spring Garden Road site, protesters' behavior and actions created unsafe conditions for both themselves, the public, and our officers. Many have claimed the protesters were peaceful. The reality is that many were confrontational, assaultive, caused hazardous situations, and as the structure was being removed with heavy equipment nearby, some threw themselves in the path of the equipment and officers doing the work that had to be done. A number of the protesters were also organized, armed with sensory irritant and projectiles. Some also brought decontamination for the sensory irritant. Some of the protesters' behavior included throwing projectiles at our officers and municipal staff and damaging municipal property. This not only hampered the removal efforts, but could have led to serious injury for anyone in the vicinity. As a result of these events, unfortunately, the Halifax Regional Police had to make 24 arrests. These were offenses including obstruction, assault police, resist arrest, and mischief. Given the volume of people, it took time to process each of them appropriately. All were released from custody in the evening on a promise to appear. Additionally, there are some questions being raised on social media and email correspondence that we are happy to address in the Q&A section to the extent that we can. I also want to say that citizens have been following lots of social media commentary and some claims that have been made. Please do not take every claim as fact. I also encourage people to take a close look at the videos and visuals to gain a perspective on the complexities of the situation our officers were met with yesterday. These could have led to widespread and serious injuries. I also want to address the issue of media access that has been raised. I want to be very clear. The Halifax Regional Police respects the right of media and expects their participation in matters of public interest, and we make every effort to facilitate their access. At this time, we have no specific information in relation to our officers asking media for credentials, as has been claimed. However, here is some context. This was a rapidly evolving and fluid situation. Officers were in the process of containing a situation and establishing an operational perimeter. This was to allow for the safe removal of temporary dwellings that were in fact illegal. A number of reporters chose to set up or film very close to the area where there was active removal work going on to keep them away from the hazardous situations. Police were responsible for everyone at the scene. And for safety reasons, an officer repeatedly asked a reporter to move from the area back to the nearby area on some steps that the reporters were on. This was not meant to limit access to the events or any reporting efforts, but to ensure that no one would get hurt. The reporter that was being dealt with by the officer refused to comply with the direction very specifically given to protect that individual and take them out of harm's way. As always, we encourage anyone with any specific or additional details, information, or concerns to bring it forward and connect with our Professional Standards Division. They can be reached by email at hrpprofstand@halifax.ca. They can also be reached by phone at 902-490-4127. That will allow us to look into the matter into its entirety. I want to conclude by saying that it is our role to protect the public and other users of municipal properties and residents in nearby communities. We cannot also allow trespass and misuse of municipal property to become the norm in our city. As we have seen of late, with tents and structures appearing arbitrarily on many sites across the municipality. Our approach has been and will remain focused on engagement, awareness, and education while offering alternatives to those experiencing homelessness. Enforcement will always be a last resort when it comes to this issue, as we have seen over the past 6 months. Constable Joseph, I will now turn it over to you to moderate the call.
Thank you, Chief. To allow everyone an opportunity for questions, you will be allowed one question and one follow-up question. We'll start with Isabel Buckmaster from the Coast. Isabel, please go ahead with your question.
Awesome, thank you. Just for my first question, I was wondering, given the use of force seen at the shelter removal yesterday, does the police feel that its actions were appropriate and specifically proportional?
The deployment and the officers that were deployed, Isabel, were faced with a hostile, aggressive, assaultive, protesting crowd that came equipped, organized, and well-planned to do what they did that day. I'm not referring to everyone in the crowd, but there certainly was a number of individuals that came with a purpose and an agenda. The officers had to ensure the protection and safety of everyone around, and they did that using their training, their skill, and their professionalism.
Isabel, do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, thank you. I was just wondering, do you have confirmation that all of the unhoused residents whose shelters were removed yesterday were both offered and actually secured housing? Thank you.
Thanks, Isabel. My information, and I can confirm that everyone that was dealt with at the sites yesterday was offered housing. I cannot confirm whether they accepted that opportunity and offer from the province and municipality.
Thank you. We will move on to Danielle Edwards with the Canadian Press. Danielle, please go ahead with your question.
I just wanted to ask if the use of the sprayed irritant is just general procedure for dealing with situations like this.
So thank you for your question, Danielle. With any interaction between the police and the public, there's a number of steps that occur, starting with officer presence on arrival, depending when they're in uniform or not. Then it begins with, tactical communication from there and conversation. And then we get into the realm of what the people we are dealing with exhibit. What behavior are they showing us, and how do we respond based on their responses? For some detail on the deployment of the sensory irritant, I'll invite Superintendent Matthews to come up to the podium.
Thank you, Chief. Good morning, or good afternoon, everyone. So in relation to the deployment of the sensory irritant, officers on scene have to weigh many options. They have to decide what tools that they're going to use that are available to them to keep people safe. And then they have to determine, can they rationalize the use. So in yesterday's events, we fully expect the officers that deployed the sensory irritant to rationalize their use. We're going to look into the details of that use. And at this point in time, I feel there's an appropriate use of the OC spray at the event yesterday.
Thank you. And Danielle, do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, I just wanted to confirm, but the 24 individuals who were arrested, have they all been charged? With, I think you'd mentioned mischief and resisting arrest. Have they all had charges placed on them?
Yes, Danielle, all 24 involved have been charged accordingly and released.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll move on to Blair Rhodes with CBC. Blair, please go ahead with your question.
Thank you, Chief. I did not witness this personally, but a number of people said they saw officers removing their name badges from the front of their uniforms, and I did see that none of the officers that were forming the cordon around the shelter of the old library were wearing name badges. Can you tell us why that was done and what was the purpose of that?
So thanks, Blair. I am aware of that particular situation. And what I can tell you is that the policy of the Halifax Regional Police is that officers will wear their identification name tags unless there's some, extenuating circumstance that would prevent that. And in this particular case, we are reviewing the situation in its entirety. And the other piece I would say that, and knowing you weren't there, Blair, if anyone that was there that has further details or specific information, to please reach out. We'd be happy to hear from them and their experience. They can contact our Professional Standards Division or they can reach out to me directly, and we'll certainly follow up.
Blair, do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, also on the subject of uniforms, there was an officer spotted in the crowd wearing a thin blue line patch. I was wondering whether you have any thoughts on that.
Well, what I can tell you, Blair, is it's similar to my previous answer. Under policy, officers are only permitted to wear what is issued and supplied by the Halifax Regional Police. Again, I am aware of mentions and that situation with that particular patch. And I would just reiterate, anyone with further information to come forward, let us know. We'd love to talk to you, and we'll continue to review this situation in its entirety.
Thank you. We will move on to Zane Woodford with the Halifax Examiner. Zane, go ahead with your question.
Hi, thank you. A 10-year-old girl was pepper sprayed yesterday. Do you think that was a reasonable use of the sensory irritant, and are you okay with that?
Thanks for your question, Zane. And we have to look at this in its totality and what was happening at the scene. And what I can tell you is we went to 3 sites in the morning, and all 3 sites were cleared with really without issue. There was no situations that required any intervention from police, other than the first 2 things I mentioned, which is officer presence and tactical communication. We're very well assisted by HRM staff. And later, when we got to the site on Spring Garden Road, we were faced with a very different crowd. A different crowd that came prepared, organized, planning, armed, and they were prepared to execute their particular agenda. Officers at the scene were faced with many complexities, and the deployment of the sensory irritant is on the scale of use of force options that are available, just below certain things that are much more intrusive and could potentially cause further injury to people. and, just above the regular compliance. And under the circumstances where the sensory irritant was deployed, there are situations where the irritant can atomize and get into the air, depending on airflow and the wind. It can travel a little bit. It's generally in a less concentrated form than a direct application. And under the circumstances and what the officers were faced with, and I want to remind everybody, assaulted behavior, planned, projectiles, they were prepared to decontaminate themselves at the scene if sensory irritant was deployed. And further to that, a number of my officers were assaulted yesterday, kicked, punched, headbutted, and that's the situation that they were faced with, and they responded appropriately.
Zane, do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, thank you. A few of your officers explicitly threatened to arrest journalists, including myself, the one you spoke about earlier, and a few others. Are you okay with that? Are you going to do anything to ensure your officers, including staff sergeants, have a better understanding of freedom of the press in the future?
So I'll just reiterate what I said, and I'll be clear again. We certainly respect the right of all journalists to do their job. We provide access all the time. We work with journalists when we can. This particular instance, and I'm only aware of one, Zane, and if you were, if you have something that you want to share with us, I would encourage that you do that and reach out. I'm only aware of the one incident where one reporter refused to remove themselves from a hazardous and unsafe situation. That situation was determined to be unsafe by the officers at the scene. That situation had to be made safe, and I know that the individual that the officer was dealing with was repeatedly told to first asked and then told to get back behind a certain area so they were out of harm's way. I know that the individual did not comply. They refused to comply, trying to get in for a better shot. And that's part of the deal. But from our perspective, we have to protect people, sometimes from themselves. That's an obligation that we have. And in this particular case, the officer went to great lengths to ensure that the individual that they were dealing with was kept safe. And I'm happy to say that that was the outcome.
Thank you. We will move on now to Francis Campbell with the Chronicle Herald. Francis, please go ahead with your first question, or with your question.
Thank you. The question is, how many of these illegal lodgings still exist, and how and when might they be removed?
Thanks, Francis. Appreciate the question. So, as we all know, there's a number of encampments across the city, all of them illegal in municipal parks. We always have the consideration of, how the encampments are affecting what goes on in the neighboring community, and there are still a number in existence. We also have two types. We have the wooden sheds and we have tents. So we've been dealing with them as best we can in consultation and in partnership with HRM Compliance and HRM Parks and Rec staff. What I can tell you is that we will continue to work with staff, the social navigators, the province, and the individuals that are illegally camping in these areas to try to get them into housing options. And we're happy to do that and continue to work with them.
Francis, do you have a follow-up question?
I do, thank you. Several officers were seen filming the goings-on with DSLR cameras or whatever. Will that video be used for additional arrests or charges, or any additional arrests and charges being considered?
Well, we did in fact have a robust deployment plan to ensure the safety of everyone that was participating. And we did in fact have that capability deployed. So we'll certainly look at that at the right time. And we do know, in fact, that there was a number of criminal offenses that were committed for which individuals were not apprehended. So if there's any evidence that comes to light through videos online, social media, or people that might want to come forward, they can also come forward through Crime Stoppers and provide information of who may have participated in illegal activity. We will certainly follow up on that and investigate accordingly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have we heard from everyone on the line? Okay, Chief, We've completed all the calls on the line at this time.
Thanks, Alicia. Really appreciate it. Thanks to everybody on the line for your questions. I'm going to go to the floor, and I'll put my first question to Heidi.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm wondering about, when you noticed the Spring Garden Road location had these protesters and things were getting to the situation of tension, why not just walk away and say, we'll do this another time?
So, it's the situation itself was ongoing, fluid, and a number of situations had arose up until that point. One of the precipitating events that changed the dynamic of the crowd. They were already assaultive. They were already abusive towards everyone in the area. Not all of the crowd, but some of them. And at that point, when the individual who was apprehended from the roof, that changed the demeanor of the crowd again. And the crowd actually, not all of them, but a number of them, elevated to the next level in regards to their assaultive behavior. And that, quite frankly, needed to be addressed at the time. And because of the fluidity of the situation, officers continued their efforts and continued with what they needed to accomplish.
Follow-up question.
Sure,
in the
go
use
ahead.
of the irritant, I'm just wondering, because in several videos, it seems to be sprayed from a distance. And operationally, should it not, I don't know, be just used in a close, like when you can hit your target as opposed to I spoke to someone today who sort of was in the background and wasn't involved in the original altercation, but of course ended up being in this case. But, best case scenario and all, but operationally, what's the guideline for deploying that?
So appreciate the question. And as mentioned, OC spray is one of the use of force options that we do have available to us as police officers here with HRP. And for some of the details on that, I'm going to turn it over and invite Superintendent Matthews up to speak to that.
Thank you, Chief. Just for a few more details on the OC deployment. There's different types of delivery methods we can use. Some are concentrated stream, some they fan out in more of a general direction. Some are designed to use, to move large crowds. Some are used for very targeted use. I'm not exactly sure what instance you're speaking of, but just very generally, they're designed in a couple different ways.
So which one were we using, or HRP using, I mean?
We have a few different delivery methods.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to move across the room. And, the other thing I would say, the delivery methods are specific to threat cues, et cetera, that officers are faced at the time. And they respond, appropriately based on training.
I don't want this to count as one of my questions, just technical clarification. Is it mace or pepper spray?
It's called, it has different terms. Oleoresin capsicum spray is the actual terminology. It is a sensory irritant. And that's because the active ingredient is oleoresin. So, and the capsicum, the spray part of it is the hot part. So it's not mace.
Oh, so colloquially, can we call it pepper spray? Is that accurate?
You could call it pepper spray. Yeah, OC spray is a term that we use. Sensory irritant is fine as well.
Okay. So I'm just wondering if you can describe for me the exact de-escalation techniques that were used yesterday before things like riot gear came out, before sensory irritant was used.
Yeah, so I wouldn't be able to give you the exact details of how the situation escalated. I wasn't at the scene, much like Mr. Rhodes, I wasn't there. Superintendent Matthews wasn't there, so I won't call him up to specifically speak to it because we cannot, because we weren't there. Some of those issues obviously will come out in court when officers are required to, justify the uses of force that they used. And what I can tell you is that in every instance when officers use force under certain requirements, they have to put in a report that kind of justifies and summarizes why they did, what they were facing with. But in generic terms, and I mentioned earlier, starts with officer presence, then it moves to tactical communication. And then we begin to move through the use of force continuum based on the threat cues exhibited by subjects. So that's kind of what we're faced with. And depending where they take it, we begin to escalate through the use of force continuum, generally with a +1 attitude and response to make sure that we can end situations as safely and as de-escalated and as with little force as possible. hence the use of the sensory irritant or OC spray versus the use of the baton or some other use of force option that we have. It's less intrusive, less opportunity for people to get injured, and commensurate and proportional generally to what they're facing. Again, can't speak to the details because I wasn't there.
And just getting back to the child who ended up being a casualty of this use of force, what efforts are going to go into determining, the decision-making of that particular officer who, perhaps should and could have noted that he was in proximity to a child? And are there additional investigations that will take place because there was a child there?
So, all situations that we're involved in are looked at through an operational debrief. And that process is ongoing currently and will continue to do that. What I would say, just to reiterate, because there seems to be some confusion that officers had all sorts of time and they could have done different things. And we don't know because we weren't there. But we can certainly see the videos and the visuals that are there. We have people being pelted with projectiles. We have people being punched and kicked. We have people being headbutted. We have a very high assaultive situation. We have certain officers having to move out of the way and take maneuvers to not be hit with some of these projectiles or punched or kicked by the crowd. So I wouldn't want to speculate on why things were deployed or how they were. To my previous response, I can't give those kind of details. But what I can tell you is, based on the situation that the officers were faced, dynamic, fluid, assaultive, they were in a very complex and difficult situation and responded to the best of their abilities with what they had under the circumstances.
I want to ask as well about yesterday's release, recognizing that when the release was sent out, the situation was, still ongoing. The scale of the information in the release was disproportional to the scale of what we saw on the streets yesterday, and it didn't even confirm things that were captured clearly on video, such as the use of sensory irritant. Didn't provide any numbers on arrests or the scale of the police deployment or the number of officers. Why were none of, or the fact that there was a child casualty, why was none of that mentioned in the release?
So as mentioned already, the situation was unfolding. You're exactly right. It was shortly, sometime around 3:10 p.m., give or take, when the individual came down from the shelter. And one of the things that we like to do before we do any media releases is to have the facts. And it takes some time to gather the facts. And one of the things that I would ask everyone to do, really, when you're looking at this, is dispel rumors and promote facts. That's what we should be doing. And for us to be commenting on things that we don't have confirmed or we're not aware of, that would just be irresponsible, and we need to make sure we have all the facts. We gave you the best information we could at the time. We cannot possibly go through every video that was showing up online and analyze them to the extent that they're concrete. And I will tell you, with a lot of the videos that are out there, they're snippets of situations. Precipitating events are often discarded or cut off, and post events are often discarded or cut off. To Francis's question, there is a video, and that we will be reviewing. And I would encourage anyone out there with other information or other videos that you might have, please send them in. We're happy to look at them, share them with us. That will help us to get the situation in its entirety and ensure that we have everything covered off. And I'm just going to move across.
Yes, thank you.
We gave Elizabeth a couple extra questions.
In fairness to all, we just have to carry
That's
on
okay.
now.
No, I'm a photographer, Tim Krochak, I'm a photographer at the Chronicle Herald. I was there yesterday when all this stuff went down. I understand the frustrations. Both sides were completely agitated. You could see it was a hot day, pressure's up. But when there was the one fellow that was on top of that shed for several hours, and there was a police officer speaking with him on the ladder, and then the young guy, he gave a little speech to the crowd,
right,
and then he was brought down, and he was promptly arrested. And it was almost like he was trying to almost diffuse the situation by his words, saying, the battle here is over. And then he came down, you took him into custody, and then this is where most of the trouble was, you have to admit, anybody who was there, was when you were taking people that you were taking into custody to awaiting vehicles. You had people officers being attacked and such. And people were laying down in front of the road, blocking vehicles and such, shaking vehicles, which obviously precipitated the pepper spray. Because there was police officers were surrounded, they were outnumbered, and whatever else. If you choose to use pepper spray, I'm not a tactician. But you did make a choice of taking that guy into custody, which ended up provoking the crowd. You think maybe if you could have used somebody's, I know the situation is fluid now, but when you can take advantage of somebody who's trying to be conciliatory to diffuse the situation.
Right, Tim, and thanks for the question. It's good that you were there to have the up close and personal view of it. One of the things that we have to consider is the de-escalation. And the officer that you mentioned that was speaking to the individual up on the roof was a trained negotiator, brought in specifically to de-escalate and try to get that individual down from the top of the roof without injury, and that ultimately happened. And my information is just as yours, that the individual chose to come down, and that is a good thing. That's where we needed to head. But we do have to deal with the totality of the situation, and we do have to ensure that people are held accountable when that is required. At least in the first instance. Hang on, let me finish.
Sorry.
At least in the first instance, that we do our job. We had other individuals that are arrested for similar offenses, and there isn't an opportunity based on the totality of the situation for us to say you don't get arrested, you do get arrested. I wasn't there. I don't know the grounds. I don't know the information that led to the decision making. But what I can tell you is those individuals are before the courts now. And the courts are the ultimate arbiter of what was done and what was not done. And I'll just remind everyone, certain individuals in that group came with an agenda. They came armed, they came prepared, they came organized. And those are the kind of things that we have to deal with on a regular basis. You follow up, or did you do?
Oh, no, that's good. No.
Okay. All right, thank you very.
Could I have one more?
I think we have to, in the interest.
Yeah.
Interest of fairness, I think we gotta.
Oh,
Discuss with Elizabeth after Elizabeth, we need to throw others off, but I don't think we have time.
No, we're gonna have to cut it off, Heidi, I'm sorry. And,
Sorry.
what I wanna say, number one, is thank you again for working with us in the pandemic environment. And really appreciate your participation in this event. And I really wanna thank everyone for their time. And I wish everyone a great rest of the day. Thank you very much for your attendance today.